I see, said the vampire thoughtfully, and slowly he walked across the room towards the window. For a long time he stood there against the dim light from Divisadero Street and the passing beams of traffic. The boy could see the furnishings of the room more clearly now, the round oak table, the chairs, a wash basin hung on one wall with a mirror. He set his briefcase on the table and waited. But how much tape do you have with you? Asked the vampire, turning now so the boy could see his profile. Enough for the story of a life. Sure, if it's a good life. Sometimes I interview as many as 3 or 4 people a night if I'm lucky, but it has to be a good story. And that's only fair, isn't it? Admirably fair, the vampire answered. I would like to tell you the story of my life, then. I would like to do that very much. Great, said the boy, and quickly he removed the small tape recorder from his briefcase, making a check of the cassette and the batteries. I'm really anxious to hear why you believe this, why you... No, the vampire said abruptly. We can't begin that way. That's the very opening of Interview with the Vampire, which is written by Anne Rice and published by Ballantine Books. Now, this book I first got out in the library that I'm actually sitting in right now. I just moved down from Glasgow to here, and I was a teenager and there was nothing, or at least I thought there was nothing for me to do around here, but I did like to read. I don't remember the librarian at the time thinking that maybe this was a bit old for me. She might, I don't know. But this is where I got it, Interview with the Vampire. Now, over the course of my life, vampire fiction has gone from being really quite niche to being the next big thing and back again. So you'd totally be forgiven for being put off the idea of reading a vampire novel. I mean, if your experience of vampires has come from Twilight or the Carpathian novels by, I think it's Christine Feehan, you know, this is a completely different kind of beast. Yeah? There's no heart-thumping romance. There's no dashing vampire heroes, or werewolves actually. It's really full of anti-heroes, and just the only romance is in beautiful settings, in beautiful historical settings. The book wants to help you understand what it's like to live such a very long life, a very long and unusual life, like a vampire would. Now, I've never read anything like it before, and I was gripped from the very first page. Louis, who is the narrator there, he just totally leapt off the page at me. And you know, it was the settings too. The city, the story is so richly told and expansive and absorbing, and New Orleans was just such a beautiful place. It became sort of like top place in the whole world I wanted to go to, and before that I'd really been into like, oh, I want to go to see the pyramids and things like that, but no, New Orleans. It was, I mean, Anne Rice's New Orleans, I suppose, is really the way that she steeped it in spookiness and the supernatural, and she just described it in just such loving and lush detail. I mean, she comes from New Orleans, so she you know, you can feel that when she's writing about it. She really loves the place. That love comes off the page at you. I really just wanted, after reading it, to go there and to do the full trail, you know, follow everywhere Louis went, from Lake Pontchartrain and up in the bayou where the estate that he had was, to the cemetery, St. Louis Cemetery, where the world famous witch, or infamous witch, Marie Laveau was buried, and the cathedral, St. Louis Cathedral, right there in the heart of the French Quarter. All of those places were so beautiful and evocative, and she just tells them so well, brings them to life. So the story opens at the end of the 18th century, not long after the French Revolution. Louis meets Lestat, and Lestat is a French vampire who has fled with his aging blind father, who was a duke, from the Revolution, and he's fled to New Orleans and is a homeless vampire. Louis has just actually lost his wife and his child, and he's suicidal. But when he meets Lestat, decides, yeah, okay, I'll become a vampire. when Lestat offers it. Louis really, I'm sorry, not Louis, Lestat really makes himself at home in Louis's house though. He's arrogant, he's selfish and self-centred, he's reckless and rash, and before long, Louis' slaves are all revolted, and they chase the vampires out of the estate, and they have to go and live in a I think it's a townhouse that you can visit actually in New Orleans, in the heart of New Orleans, in French Quarter. That whole thing led to loads of tension between Louis and Lestat. They have quite a lot of fallings out. Louis is quite a different vampire to Lestat. Louis thinks about everything and mourns everything as well. He feels quite bad about people he kills. So Lestat decides, in his infinite wisdom, that he's going to make another vampire to try and bridge the gap between him and Louis. But being Lestat, he does it quite wrong. He turns a child, a little girl child that Louis had been about to eat and then had an attack of conscience and not eaten. So Lestat turns this little girl, who's called Claudia, into a vampire. Now, the thing that we all know about vampires is they don't age. So when Lestat turned Claudia into a vampire, she was just a little girl. And at first, a little girl. But then her mind started growing up, whilst her body didn't. And after a while, she grew really quite angry and resentful at being made into a vampire, because with a child's body, she would always need other vampires to look after her, even though she was a fiercely intelligent young woman. So, even though they managed to live quite a long time as a happy little vampire family, at long last, Claudia has enough and decides that she is going to kill Lestat. She lets Louis in on it. He reluctantly decides to help because he's getting quite upset with Lestat for a million reasons of his own. They kill him and they flee to Europe. And Europe, they travel around Europe for ages and they don't see another vampire until they get to Paris. And in Paris, they discover a place called the Théâtre des Vampires, which is a theatre run by vampires who are pretending to be humans, pretending to be vampires. And they meet the leader of the Théâtre des Vampires, Armand, and Armand tries to persuade Louis to join them there in Paris. I'm not going to tell you any more of the story though, you just have to read it for yourself. But it's engaging, it's very gothic, it's fast-paced, it's beautifully told, and I think, in my opinion, it's better even than Bram Stoker's Dracula as a kind of serious, proper vampire horror novel. Some of the characters in Bram Stoker's Dracula get a bit wearing after a while, but the characters in Anne Rice's novel, they're very rich and well imagined. So, if you're looking for something a little different this Halloween, perhaps consider looking for this Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I'm Angela. This has been my review. Happy Halloween!